Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Miranda, and I am the program director at Artley World Nonprofit. If you don't know who we are, Artley World is a 501c3 nonprofit based out of Austin, Texas. We've been providing arts and cultural programs and supporting local artists and musicians since 2013. As many of you know, in 2020, we began our Artist Relief Project, or ARP, to provide online programs for artists and creatives and support them in their professional journey in the arts. And thanks to the support of donations from the greater community, we've been able to continue to offer these programs free of charge to artists in all disciplines across the nation and the globe. So we have a lot of people here from all over this evening. Welcome, evening, afternoon, whatever it may be where you are. Starting this season, based on feedback from the artist community, we've shifted the focus of our artist resources and programs to address the impacts of AI technologies on artists' work and livelihood. Our objective is to empower you, the artists, musicians, performers, and creators, to better understand the challenges and opportunities that AI technologies pose, and in doing so, support you in leveraging these technologies for their creative as well as their economic potential. So we're going to be doing this through free online webinars, workshops, artist talks, and presentations. If you're using AI in creative ways and would be interested in presenting to the ARP community, we'd love to hear from you. I'm going to go ahead and drop the link to our website where you can get in touch with us in the chat. There we go, on artleyworld.org. You can get in touch with us. And I know this might not apply to everybody here, but if you're in the Central Texas area, know that we are also hosting in-person events in Austin, meetups, artist talks, seminars, public showcases of artist works. We'd love to have you be a part of this community, our in-person community. So please follow us on social media at Artley World and at our website, www.artleyworld.org. We update that regularly with events that we're hosting. So what are we doing today? Today, we're here to enjoy an enlightening discussion on the ways that one artist is incorporating AI into his work. And in doing so, we hope to address some other engaging discussion topics, and we'd love to hear from you towards the end of the presentation on things such like, is it possible to use AI art tools without losing the human element of creativity? Or issues such as how can we use these tools as a partner rather than a replacement in our process of creation? So these are some of the questions and issues we're going to be hearing about today from our presenter, who I will introduce in just a moment. Before I introduce him, I want to let you know that we're recording this presentation and we will be sharing a digital copy of the presentation slides after the event. The recording is going to be posted on our resources library on YouTube. If you haven't already subscribed to that, I encourage you to do so because you'll get a notification anytime we upload a new recording. We're uploading not just these talks, but also some of our older ARP webinars on things like grant writing and artist statements, artist bios, and those sorts of things as well. So if you haven't subscribed to that YouTube playlist, I would go ahead and do that when you get a moment. And then before I introduce the speaker, I just want to say we will reserve a lot of time at the end for Q&A and discussion. So please utilize the chat or the Q&A feature to post your comments and questions throughout tonight's presentation. We really look forward to exchanging on this topic and engaging in discussion from multiple angles, wherever you may reside in your position about AI and AI art. We want to hear from you and we want to talk through this stuff. All right. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker. Let me go ahead and pull him up on screen. Right, Jeff, if you want to switch on your camera. So tonight we have Jeff Wilson, who is an artist from the Austin area. We are representing Austin this evening. A little about Jeff. For more than 20 years, mixed digital media artist and technologist Jeff Wilson has been at the forefront of the fine arts and technology worlds, blending technology into his creative process and most recently incorporating artificial intelligence into his tool belt. With a degree in sculpture from Syracuse University and a long career in IT, Jeff's work blends the technical and the aesthetic, His art focuses on a unique perspective of diversity and collaboration, using technology as the platform to incorporate a variety of technical approaches. And Jeff's work is centered on exploring how you can collaborate between the human and machine while maintaining what is truly human in the arts. So really excited to hear from him this evening. And without further ado, I guess I'll pass it over to you, Jeff. Look forward to learning.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate that, Miranda. Let me just share my screen. And where did my presentation go? There it is. All righty. Yeah, thanks, Miranda. I really appreciate this, and I appreciate all the work that you're doing in this space and with artists around town and beyond, honestly. Thank you all for showing up. I really appreciate your interest in what I'm doing and this space. I know that it's a big, confusing space, to be perfectly honest. There's a lot to think about, and it's advancing very quickly, right? So I'd like to share a little bit about some of my perspective incorporating AI into my art and my practice for the past couple of years. Full disclosure, I didn't just flip a switch at one point. I've been slowly incorporating different techniques into my work over some time. I've certainly had a lot of the same concerns that people have had, and have been thinking through some of those and navigating what I'm doing because of that. And I've given this presentation a few times now already, and I've certainly been talking to people in the space, artists, gallery owners, others, just to get their feel for how AI can be incorporated in the space. And it's really apparent to me that there are a lot of questions and a lot of sometimes concern, right? There are people like me that just want to dive headfirst in and start using things. And there are others that are really worried for good reason. And then there's an awful lot of other people who are just, not really sure what to make of it. And, the tools are advancing very quickly. There are ethical concerns, all of that kind of stuff, right? So there's a lot to take in. And so it's really important for us to be able to get together and talk about what we think about these things. I will forewarn you that there is a little bit of a bias towards using AI in this presentation. That's in no way to discount some of the concerns, right? And those are definitely out there, and we'll touch on some of those things. But I think it's really important for us to be able to understand the technology and the space and how it impacts us, to be able to have the best understanding we can of how to use it, even if you're trying things in just private, right? In your personal space, you're tinkering with things, if you want to call it that, right? But there is a value in being able to get your fingers dirty and seeing what opportunities are there. Where does it not work? Where there are pitfalls, right? These are all things that we all individually need to come to some understanding, and then come together and let's discuss and figure out what's the direction we want to take this technology in this space, because without doing so, this technology in our industry, in our art, will advance without our voices really being part of that discussion, and that would be a bad thing. So with that, let's dive in a bit. So like I say, I've been talking to people quite a bit about this space, and one of the core thoughts here is really the question of whether or not AI art is really art. And I don't mean to start super basic, but that does come up. There are some people who have opinions all over the map, right? People tend to fall into two camps, not to oversimplify things, but there are those who think of it as a tool that just makes it really easy to steal stuff from people, even unintentionally, right? This stuff is built off of real artists, real artwork, and you're leveraging this, you're incorporating that into your work, and you're passing it off as your own. That might be an issue. There are others on the other end of the spectrum who are like, well, yeah, there are some challenges and some thought-provoking parts of this, but it makes things more efficient, maybe. And it's, a creative, an artist can use it and potentially in a lot of really interesting, novel ways that we haven't really thought of. And, I think a true artist will still want to put that human touch on the work. So, at the very least, they're giving it the benefit of the doubt. Now, what's interesting about both of these camps and everybody in between is that they're referring to AI as a tool, right? And so I thought, as big as this topic is, maybe we can just start there. So I was trying to come up with an analogy to put things into perspective, make it easy to kind of start to wrap our brains around and build a story off of that. But unfortunately, AI is so immense and so expansive and so impactful that it's kind of hard to find like a proper tool analogy. Some people refer to it as sort of like the dawn of the internet, or some people go full hyperbolic and it's like link it directly to the wheel or the discovery of fire in terms of how impactful it could be. Regardless, however you think about it, like the list of technology comparables is pretty short. Now, that said, it's not like people have not faced existential questions before. Radical change, whether it's from a technology or a societal change or a variety of things, right? People have been through these sort of moments before, and it's interesting to see how they've reacted to it. Now, it strikes me that you really only have to go back like 150 years to find a really good similar story, at least in terms of how people have dealt with a similar kind of event. And that's the camera. Well, the origins of the camera is, the camera obscura, which if you don't know is a pinhole in a wall, light shining through it from whatever's on the other side of the wall, projects the image of whatever's on the other side of the wall across the room and in reverse on the wall on the other side. Now, we've known about this for 1,500, 2,000 years or something like that, but it wasn't until the 1800s, mid 1800s, before it occurred to somebody to maybe put a piece of paper on the wall there, slather it in chemicals and goo, and that image is imprinted on that piece of paper. And you can take that away and you could look at it anytime you wanted, right? And people just went bananas for this. And, it's a testament to human ingenuity and technical innovation and just the science behind optics and light and spectrum. Like, people were fascinated by this. But then somebody turned that camera towards art, and people, true to form, revolted. If there's one thing that people really love more than art, is to hate art the first time that they see it, right? And this is true for almost every art movement that's come around for the last couple centuries. Like, go ahead, look it up. Like, people get really upset when people mess with art. What art is, you don't touch it, you don't mess with it, right? And I don't mean like angry tweets of the day. Like, people like broke stuff and punched people, right? But what's really interesting about this particular point in time is really in what people said, how they reacted. And so, just to name a few, any idiot can click a button and out pops a picture. Well, that's not art. Or, as cool as this camera thing is, it's at the end of the day, it's just this box that sucks in nature and captures it as is. An artist looks at nature, analyzes it, thinks about it, modifies it, finds some way to like extract and present something in a way that's really meaningful and impactful to somebody. That's what an artist does. And of course, these poor portrait artists, right? They spent their lives developing their craft, and you're just going to replace them with a box? That's not fair, right? So it's kind of familiar, it seems to me. Of course, 150 years later, photography is well understood to be a dominant fixture in the world of art, right? We all know this. We all agree to this. And as easy it is to take a selfie, everybody knows the difference between a snapshot and a work of art. And at the end of the day, like, we know photographers work really hard to develop their craft, learn the tools, find the right shot, find something about that shot to pull out and put in a way that is really meaningful for others to enjoy. Not to mention all the work that goes into it after the shot in the dark room and in Photoshop or whatever, right? So these are really interesting, important criticisms that we've heard at the time, but people worked through it. People adapted. Those criticisms didn't go away. Those questions didn't go away, but we started to understand the space a little more. And so I wonder how we can learn from situations like this and apply it to today and see if there's a way that we can learn how to adapt with all the valid concerns and questions that we have. So there are a few considerations that I think we should keep in our back pocket. These are the things that we'll have to think about today and tomorrow, and we've thought about it in the past, and we'll think about it in the future, and so on, right? But there's just a few really sort of core ideas. First is, how much involvement does the human really need to do within a work of art? How much can we put on the machine, if you will? Like, we know that AI here is different than a pneumatic tool, right? In a sense that it does a lot of the heavy lifting, does a lot more of the work, right? How much is too much? Now, we know that I think people generally agree that, you know, humans are at the center of art when it comes down to it. It's like, you could say, you know, that something could come out of nature or a machine, and it could be beautiful, could be thought-provoking, could even be awe-inspiring, but we don't really label it art until the human has been involved, if not in the driver's seat, right? So it's important for humans to be particularly involved in the process, regardless of the technology or the tool. Like, I think a lot of people will agree with that. Does AI make things too easy? I think this is a good question. We value effort. This goes beyond art, right? But within the world of art, we value the amount of time somebody puts into developing their style or learning a process, or how much time it takes to make a piece, a thing, right? Sometimes it takes a long time. And, you know, and it doesn't even have to be manual effort. It could be mental effort. How much effort did somebody put into coming up with the right message? Or did they put themselves really in the art? Now, I'm speculating here, but I suspect that, you know, we all know that we want to be inspired by art. We want to look at art and it to be bigger than us, something that we can't do. We want to live vicariously through the art, through the artist, through the person who's putting something out there and dragging us along with that in a way that we know that we could not have done ourselves. So it's a valid question. If you make it too easy, does that kind of cheapen the thing, even if it looks cool? And then, of course, there's the ethical side of it. There's a lot to unpack here, for sure, right? There's job losses. There's the effort in transitioning because your world is changing, your job is changing, all that kind of stuff as well. But, you know, kind of what I'm thinking about a lot is the fact that a lot of what we think of as AI art is based on work from other people, right? These people did not give their consent. They were not compensated. And we can't even, if we wanted even, we can't even give them proper attribution because we don't know where the stuff comes from most of the time. So these are all sort of important things to think about. And to be perfectly honest, I don't have the full answer, and I don't think there is a full answer. I think everybody comes to their own conclusion of like where they feel comfortable with. So there's a lot of subjectivity in this, which should not be too unfamiliar for people who appreciate art, which is inherently a subjective thing anyways, right? So I want to come back, though, to this idea of, is AI art actually art? This is big, this is hard, and it kind of reminds me of the classic cliche opener to any art history 101 course, right? A professor stands up in front of, 300 teenagers or young adults and asks the question, what is art? I don't know, right? There's no answer to that, right? And it's not intended to have an answer to it. There are characteristics of art. We know what art was. We know what we want to get out of art, but putting a hard definition on it, like some constraints on it, is really hard. So the question is really intended to break the students' preconceived notions of what art is, because you can't know. But it's to give them the opportunity to start really thinking deep about that. When people naturally go to, don't mess with art, right? You don't mess with what it is. But, you know, unfortunately, that's what artists do. They make you think about what it really is, where it comes from, where it goes, how it progresses. And they love to put things in front of you that you never would have thought was art. So to be honest, I feel a bit of a challenge thinking about, you know, if I don't know what art is, personally, just speaking for myself here, I feel uncomfortable saying what art is not. So in this case, I'd like to, for the purposes of this discussion, let's flip the question around. Instead of asking, is AI art? I'd rather ask, can fine art be made with AI? And if so, how? So what I've done is I've cherry-picked a handful of topics that I've gone through, thought about a little bit, and just I want to share some of my perspective. I'm not on a soapbox. I'm not trying to push anything. But I want to just share kind of what I'm thinking, and maybe we can pick up some of this in the discussion. So let's start with authenticity. Now, by authenticity, I mean, is the artist authentic? Are they genuine? Are they true to their art, particularly when there's a new tool or a new style or something that causes the artist to want to do something different? How do they stay true to what they do and what they make and what they're about? We want to see this in our work. And so this is part of the challenge of somebody who's incorporating too much machine into their mix. They might lose control of this, right? So how do they stay true to that? How do they stay authentic? Now, for me, Miranda shared a little bit of my background already, but just to reiterate some of the stuff, I've been making digital art for 15, 20 years or so. I have a degree in traditional art, sculpture specifically, but I also have spent 27 years in IT, right? It's my day job. Art doesn't always pay the bills, as we know. But I've always been very comfortable with the blend of technology and art, because for me, again, just speaking for myself, this is two sides of my life that I have figured a way to kind of bring together. I think it's important. I think it's natural to bring technology and engineering with arts and aesthetics and things that are creative. And personally, actually, I hold true to the fact that technology and art has always been fused at the hip, if you will, from the variety of innovations in printmaking to something simple as egg tempera, which at the time was a radical new technology, pneumatic tools, digital tools like Photoshop. Like these are all things that are well understood or part of the artist tool belt, right? So technology and art has always been joined at the hip, and it's something that is important for me. You might look at these things, and these things kind of look like woodcuts, right? I call these digital woodcuts, actually, but they don't look like typical computer art. Again, my style, what I'm interested in making is something that it looks like regular art at the end of the day, something you can just stick on your wall. But one of the things that I also really like is the idea that there's technology behind it. Like it's, in this case, these digital woodcuts have the look and feel of a woodcut, perhaps, but they're done completely on the computer. And I love that you don't see that straight away. It's not obvious. You have to get to know the work before you understand what's behind it. It's kind of like meeting a person, and their first impression is one thing, but it's not until that you really get to know them that you understand their backstory and where they're coming from. So for me, this is a way of being able to sort of extend that experience from what you see to begin with to what you understand down the road. So now a few years ago, I got swept up into NFTs. This is a perfect platform for digital artists. And the thing that I got out of it in particular was just being exposed to all these new genres. I shouldn't even call them new, all these genres of digital art that I had no idea existed, to be honest. Glitch, do generative art, which is like you write code and it outputs something. It's typically abstract, not really my thing, but I love the way it looks. And of course, AI. And I wanted to incorporate some of these elements, some of these genres into my work. Now, unfortunately, I didn't really fit into any of these particular camps, right? It's not really my thing necessarily. And I wasn't really ready to like get rid of what I had been doing. I'm okay with modifying my style to a degree, but I didn't want to like fundamentally drop what I was doing and do something like somebody else. That's certainly not authentic, right? And so I came to like understand or think about it in the way like this, the term of this mixed digital media art. I don't know if it's a term, just kind of made it up, right? But for me, it's kind of like a traditional mixed media artist, right? Who blends physical components together for something. But for me, mixed digital media art It's not a very creative alteration of the term, I suppose, but it's, for me, it's about blending the technologies and digital approaches and to be able to mix and match my own thing, own my own style, but yet still incorporating what I'm seeing from all these different genres. And so, I guess in short, like I didn't fit into any of their camps, so I just made my own. Now, here's just a real lame evolution of my work over the past couple of years to a degree. On the one hand, this obviously looks different from the old stuff, the past stuff that I just showed, right? But for me, like the ability to pivot, if is there. Like I went from digital woodcuts to something that was like centered on printmaking. And I don't want to get into much of this part here, but like for me, like that, the idea of printmaking, first off, was still somewhat linked to what I had been doing, but it's really actually a better metaphor for what I do in my work, right? For me, printmaking is part technical, part art, right? Part manual, part conceptual. And it's also a thing that's been linked to art from day one. Caves in Lascaux with all those handprints on the wall, right? And crazy figures and things, right? That's a print. It's a handprint, right? But it's a print. And that technology from your hand to wood blocks to intaglio and lithography and risographs and so on along the way, those are innovations, technical innovations that happened that brought something to the artist. And that's what I love about the blend of technology and art together, right? So at its core, that's what I'm trying to do. So you can see elements in here, some of the genres that I'm referring to, even though maybe it's not obvious. So the sort of that engraving texture is actually written by code and applied to my work, right? It's a way of being able to reference that generative art, but I've sort of scrapped the abstract side of that because that's not me, but I wanted the code part and I've applied it in my own way. Glitch kind of is sprinkled in here. It's not very obvious because it's not supposed to be super obvious to me, but I love the blend of old school art plus a little bit of something new, and making something glitchy is kind of new, right? So it's a good visual element for me. The AI side, I know this is supposed to be an AI talk, so the AI side was a little bit more challenging because I could not get the tools to output the kind of work that I wanted to do. Now, a lot of it was because I was new to the tools. I couldn't quite figure them out. Maybe they were a little immature at the time. For whatever reason, I couldn't use the tools to output what I thought was my kind of work. So I took a step back and I looked at my process, which is reasonably complex, actually. It's a series of steps. And I thought, look, if there's a way for me to be able to sort of maintain control, like none of that workflow has anything to do with a technology. It's just the process I go through to go from an initial idea to the final piece, right? And part of that early on is photographs or images of some form, either something I took or some royalty-free thing I grabbed online. Figured, well, that's a place where I could use AI. I can't figure out how to make the final piece, but great, I can use that for this one part of my workflow and inject it in there. Now, over time, I've learned the tools a little bit better, of course, but I really like to just sort of call attention to this last image here, which is more representative of the work that I've been doing lately. And in particular, in these images, it's the words here, or at least the lettering, I should say. Now, image models today have trouble with words. They're image models. They're not language models, like what ChatGPT uses. Image models know what a letter looks like, but they don't know how to string them together into a coherent word, right? And there are all these tools that are coming out right now that are based on or trying to fix this. And they're coming out every single day, right? 6 months from now, this will not be a thing. But I love the gibberish, actually. And it also, it reminds me a little bit of like foreign posters or graffiti. Like I can appreciate the words in the space, in the composition, even if I can't read it. And it also makes me think about technologies that have had similar flaws that we overcame, and that original technology became obsolete, potentially even nostalgic. Like I'm thinking TVs before we figured out how to add color, or film before sound, right? So artists love to capture a moment, especially when that moment is going to be gone. And 6 months from now, this will be gone. So it's kind of important for me to, to capture this right now. I won't be doing this in a year, but, for now, it's like an important part of my process. But it also makes me think a little bit of the Impressionist painters, which, came around the time of when the camera. In fact, they came around because of the camera, but they didn't turn to the camera to do the work for them. They went to the camera till they learned from the camera. They learned from the technology. They took the learnings of the science of light and spectrum and color, and they brought it into the work that they were doing, and they made it their own. Right? So sometimes the technology speaks to you. It doesn't just do the work for you. It helps guide the concepts behind what the art is and what it means. And people are doing some amazing things with this. Right? It's not about what the technology does, but it's what the technology makes you think about. And so that's what I'm trying to do here with these pieces. This is what I mean by being authentic. So let's move to something a little bit more practical and tactical. My workflow is complex, and I get it that everybody has their own process. But if there's one thing that all artists have in common, it's this phase of exploration and experimentation. You're testing ideas. You're trying to either expand or challenge what you want to do or what you're thinking, or sometimes you're just trying to get some inspiration, right? This could be in a sketchbook. This could be just Googling around looking for inspiration. But there's like an important part of the process where you're trying to like jumble things around and see what you get. And so, unsurprisingly, AI can really help here. Regardless of what you think about doing the final work, what about just in the explorations to begin with? So I wanted to pull out a few things that I'm doing in this space. First is like the most obvious example, where I generate tons and tons of images, sometimes hundreds. Sometimes they don't have an idea. Sometimes I have a pretty strong idea, but like I'm going into this space, trying to challenge it, trying to expand it, seeing where those happy accidents are. That gives me a thought. Well, maybe I want to pivot around to this thing. This could be cool, right? And that all feeds into this final piece, right? So this piece in color that you're looking at, right, is not an AI generated images, though there are AI elements that I brought into it, and then my workflow does all kinds of stuff to it. Including handwork. There's like handwork painting stuff on top of that as well, right? So it's not completely digital to a degree, or well, completely AI, but it doesn't even come from an individual experiment, right? I'm pulling from different experiments, and coddling, things together in a sense. And this is a really important part of the process, right? And it's very similar to just sketching in a sketchbook in a sense. Well, a couple of things I want to call out. One thing is that this makes my work very much more efficient, but it doesn't make it faster. It doesn't make it quicker, right? I still need the same amount of time to become comfortable with an idea, but I can just jam a whole lot more experiments in that time, right? The other thing that I want to call out is if you're not a digital artist, there's nothing that says that this is only for digital artists or even AI artists for that matter. Right? You could be a sculptor or oil painter or something, and you're playing with forms and colors and compositions in the same way. And then you turn away to your rock or your canvas in the same way that you turn away from the sketchbook. So this is, perhaps a useful tool. The second thing I want to call it is maybe something that's a little bit specific to my work. I mentioned that printmaking is really important to my work. But maybe there are ways that this could be applied to others as well. And in a sense that, since I'm interested in sort of incorporating various different printmaking techniques, I'm always looking for new techniques and new approaches. And I watch a lot of YouTube videos, right? And so it's great to be able to like watch what other people are doing. But of course, you want to be able to do something yourself. Now, I'm not a printmaker, so I can't turn to a gel plate or a lithography stone or something, right? So I have my own tools. I turn to Midjourney in this example, right? And where I'm playing around with the technique. And the images that you're seeing here are like just scrap images. I'm just putting stuff on on various images to see what happens if I put on something that's very dark or very light, have a lot of white space, or it's very complicated or very simple, right? I want to play around with it as if I'm playing around with a new material or a new medium, right? What if it's a little scratchy or streaky, or maybe it's a little clear, or maybe I just want to play around with color palettes and seeing what I get. So it has nothing to do with a final piece or a composition, but it's learning a material in the same way that somebody who's a sculptor working on a new kind of stone they found, or a painter working with a different kind of paint that they're not used to, right? That's what I'm using here. The third example that I want to give is something that is a bit different because it's nothing to do with generating images. It's being able to talk through an idea, which is really important, right? I'm using ChatGPT every single day. You could use Bard or Claude or Llama 2 or whatever, right? But the idea of having a buddy that you can bounce ideas off of, and brainstorm with and ask for inspiration or different ways of looking at things and have a conversation, it's really, really powerful. And in particular with this tool, too far. Well, what is happening? Oh, now I'm drawing. Look at that. Oh, there's a screen that I can't seem to get to, unfortunately, but what's recently been rolled out by OpenAI in ChatGPT, and it's unfortunate you can't see the picture, is the ability to upload pictures to it. They call it computer vision, which is much broader than what I'm referring to here. But like within this particular tool, ChatGPT, if you have a pro account, you have the ability to upload pictures and it understands the pictures, right? You could talk about the work itself, not just like what you think about the word in words, but like actually the pictures themselves. So imagine I'm trying to create like a series of 10 or 15 pictures, and I upload a few, starter images, and I can now have that conversation to like figure out, how do I expand this to the rest of the collection? How do I make sure things have got a nice diverse spread of compositions, but they're still consistent, or maybe I should just use more blue or something. I don't know, right? Whatever you want to talk about, you could do that, which is really interesting. Oh, there's my picture. So, that's what it kind of looks like. I've taken that even a step further. And this might really not be your thing, but, again, I'm comfortable with engineering. I wrote an application that is a chat application, but also extends it to be able to allow me to input a scenario, a setting for where this conversation is taking place. Why is this conversation happening? Who are the characters in it? So this is a multi-person chat here. Each person here has their own persona that I've defined. Their backgrounds, their interests, their roles, their biases, the way they respond to things, the way they screw up things, right? All of that stuff is fed into a persona for each of these people. And now imagine having a team of people. You ask a question, you're getting a variety of types of responses back. This is all generated with AI. And just for fun, I actually also included text to speech and speech to text AIs to this. So I could literally talk to it and it talks back to me with each of these people in their own voice. It's a lot of fun, actually. And if you think this is like way beyond you, full disclosure here, I had ChatGPT write this for me. So there's that. All right, so let's get into some more, maybe a little bit more of the heavy stuff. I won't spend a whole lot of time here, to be honest. I'm sure a lot of the conversation afterwards might fall on some of these things. Full disclosure, there are things that I'm not referencing here that are part of the considerations for true in a longer conversation about the job losses and transitions that people will have to go through and all that other kind of stuff. But I'm kind of focused here on the idea that a lot of this is built off of art from other people, right? That people did not consent to, weren't compensated, all that kind of stuff. So these are just a few thought starters. So to begin with, boy, this is going slow. First off, I think it's important to realize that there are two perspectives here. There's the legal, and then there's public opinion. Now, on the legal side, you may have heard as an example that you can't, there was a recent ruling that says you can't copyright AI images. That is true, but that doesn't really tell the full story. There's, what they really came back with is we can't give you protection for AI work until we hear like X, Y, and Z, a bunch of like considerations for what they typically use to take some content and say, yep, you own this. Like you did it. It's your thought. Here's the reasons, blah, blah, blah. Like whatever their reasons are. for whatever reason, the case that was brought to the court did not include these things. Though, interesting enough, I hear that they could have in some cases, but I don't know if that would have flipped the decision in any way, but it does raise the question that others are going to come and try to make that argument. So this is very early in those discussions. The other side of this is not just so much on like what's generated from it, is what's going into it, right? The fact that artists, their work is being used to train these models. So you generate something, it's based on somebody else's work. Is that really fair? And there are people who have very strong opinions. I have some opinions myself, but I also recognize that, hey, for one, I am not a legal expert. I don't know. Right. And I do also know, though, that there are legal experts and they don't know. They have not agreed. This is all up in the air. There's so many perspectives that feed into this. It's a real head scratcher, to be honest. Honestly, it may not seem fair, but we'll save that for the public opinion side. Right. From the legal perspective, it's not set in stone right now. Right now, I will say that if this concerns you, and it probably should, there are companies that are trying to get out ahead of this. Adobe, Microsoft, Getty Images, they have massive amounts of images. Some aren't, some not, but they're training their own models, and they own those pictures, right? They have the right to give you the right to use them. And so if you use their models, you're at least navigating around the legal side of things. And I think that we'll see more of this coming. This is reasonably known, right? So I think that this will probably be the direction that a lot of people are going. Because we're not just talking about fine art. We're also talking about people who are using art in their businesses, their products, things that they could really legitimately be sued for, right? So this is being solved, even if the legal side hasn't really caught up yet. On the public opinion side, I'll say that's a different story, because right now, and even later, there will be all kinds of things that are legal, but bad form, right? Not cool. But we expect artists to like find their own thing, do their own kind of work. Don't copy somebody else, do your stuff, like find your own thing, right? We expect that. And sometimes people overlap with others, and it becomes questionable, right? And so sometimes people get pushback. So we hope that the market sort of forces people not to do bad things. But on the flip side, there is a long history of appropriation in fine art. And I'm not talking about fraudsters and grifters and people who are trying to like cheat the system. I'm talking like legitimate, actual, well-respected artists. Roy Lichtenstein, Cindy Sherman, Marcel Duchamp, Picasso basically appropriated an entire continent, right? And there's what do they call that? Fan art, which is a well-respected genre that is explicitly about derivative work of copyrighted stuff. Wow. Right. And this might be a couple of steps away. Maybe I'm stretching, but collage art. Everybody likes collage art. Well, a lot of people do. Right. But that's not really copying somebody else's work. That's like literally tearing their work out of something and pasting it and saying, oh, it's mine now. Right. So I don't know. Right. We like to think that people are going to be good and do their own thing. And if you do copy somebody else's, maybe you have like some reason, it's part of your message or your whatever, but sometimes that's not always the case. So that, in some way, that's kind of up to you to navigate that. By extension, if you have a concern about having your stuff lifted, I don't know what to tell you. Like there's no protection for that. And that's actually a good thing. It has nothing to do with AI, but it's longstanding. Your style cannot be protected. If somebody's going to do your stuff, well, cross your fingers that karma's going to get them, right? But this is intentional, right? Because look, if you're a minimalist artist or an abstract artist or you're a portrait artist or a landscape artist, I guarantee you there's 100 people who are doing stuff exactly like what you're doing. And the intention here is that artists should have the creative freedom to be able to express themselves without the worry of overlapping other people's styles. It's also really hard to quantify how much somebody copied you, right? So it's a hard thing. And we've, at least the government says, we're going to give you a little free rein here. So I don't know, do what you will with that. That does lead me to this comment of this phrase of in the style of, which is a way of being able to say, give me a picture, a cafe scene in the style of Toulouse-Lautrec. And chances are you're going to get a Toulouse-Lautrec looking picture back, right? And so you might ask, well, why would somebody who's trying to use this for good to make their own art in their own way, why would they use this? What purpose is this other than to give somebody who wants to steal somebody's stuff a way to do it? There's a simple reason for that when it comes down to it. Prompts favor brevity. You may, for example, like Dutch Renaissance landscapes. Now, you might do something completely different, but you like the color schemes, the use of the clouds, the composition, right, from just a general perspective, and you want to be able to incorporate that into your work. You could use a lot of words to describe it, but chances are something's going to get dropped and it's not going to work right. So you have this little shorthand of in the style of, in this case, Mr. Solomon, and it'll incorporate some of that stuff into a piece. Now, hopefully, the rest of your prompt, if you're one of those good actors, includes all kinds of other information that makes it something different, that is clearly not Mr. Solomon, right? And you can see incorporated into this elements of that style, the colors, the clouds, whether it's a photograph or something more graphic or whatever, right? Just something to think about. There is a good use for this, even though you're technically borrowing from somebody. Hopefully you've made it your own somehow. So I'm looking at the time. I want to make sure that I, cover a couple of things here that I think are interesting, but yet go beyond the art creation, right? The artist is a small business owner. You're in charge of more than just manufacturing. You're in sales, you're in marketing, you're in all the rest of the business, right? What can AI do to help you? I'll just give you a few examples. Starting with going back to ChatGPT. Maybe you're not a good writer, you're a good painter. You paint good, but you don't write good, right? Maybe. I like to think of myself as a reasonably good writer, but honestly, I really, really suffer from that blank slate syndrome. Like getting started is hard. So what I do, if I have like a bio that I need, or like a collection that I need an artist statement for or something, right? I word vomit, just blah, 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 all this stuff, just everything I can think of. And then I say, can you give me an artist statement that incorporates this thinking? And I start from there. Another way to really help that process is to be able to follow it up with like ask me a prompt, or ask me a question about the work. So generate the artist statement, but then ask me something that really, helps inform the next iteration of the work, and feed that answer in and then repeat, right? So it generates something, it asks you a question, you answer it, it feeds it back in and repeats, and you're distilling until you get to something that's really what you like, right? Or at least close enough where you can hand edit at the end. So it really helps there in that case. Another way, kind of going back to the image generation, is not image generation for your art, but what is everything around your art. If you sell stuff on Etsy, or you're putting together a brochure or a newsletter or something, like being able to put your work into a context, you could use AI to generate the room so that you can put your piece in. And, if that's not really your thing, there's a whole ecosystem around this actually, where you can go on Etsy or other places, and you can, get these mock-ups, like not just for rooms, but for, cups and other merchandise and other things. Or if you have particular types of rooms that are perfect for the setting of your kind of art, you can find those kinds of things, right? So this is really helpful from a product development perspective, like the packaging for your art, not so much the art itself. So this is an interesting space. So there's also a laundry list of ways that you can use this within like the rest of your business for helping you with, trends or market forecast, helping you with your customer communications, your newsletters, being able to help with your, social marketing. When it comes down to it, some of these things have tools and services that you can sign up for, and people are using AI to do things like, for example, upload a whole bunch of pictures or something, and it generates a whole bunch of tweets that are perfect for like what you're trying to accomplish, as an example. Or you might just be using general tools like ChatGPT, and just for your own, helping automate some of the tasks that you do, so the possibilities here are really endless. The last thing that I want to point out, though, are there are a whole bunch of future possibilities. We are so early in this space, right? One thing to take into consideration is you can fine tune your own models, right? If you're worried about overlapping with other people's stuff, upload your own images, fine tune a model on your work specifically, and then you can use it to generate other stuff. And maybe you don't want that generated stuff to be like the final piece, but maybe you say, here's my style, but I want to do people doing this kind of a thing, and I'll put something, and then you turn to your canvas and you paint it or something, right? That's one way to use this. And you can actually use this today with little effort, going to like something like Midjourney, and you upload just a handful of your pictures into it and then say, give me a cafe scene, but in this style. It will ignore everybody else, and it's just doing it in your own style. So there's something there. There are also just an incredible amount of stuff that people are doing beyond image generation, like these immersive experiences using AI and machine learning, its close cousin, to be able to create experiences that are fine-tuned to I shouldn't use that word, but whatever, tuned to like the environment, the audience, or maybe they're just using data, not pictures, to create something that's new, right? So there's all kinds of amazing ways that people are using AI that have nothing to do with pictures you stick on your wall. So there's something there. Just a couple of other things I want to call out: the business integrations. It's really important for artists to find a diverse set of products and channels for their work, right? You may not want to just rely on pictures that you put on walls. Maybe you want to, make beach towels or coffee mugs. Like there's plenty of stuff allowing you to be able to do that. But I think that as businesses incorporate more AI into their own work, there are avenues for art to get in there as well. And just as one dopey example, Zillow or realtor.com, right? People like real estate agents are increasingly using AI to stage properties, right? Instead of putting real stuff in there, they're using AI to fill out the space. There's an avenue there for art on the walls. Maybe it's even driven by who's looking at it, so that certain parts, certain works of yours or certain artists are used in certain cases based on who's using it. It's like, it's insane, like the amount of things that you could possibly do here. And that's just one industry. It could be very different for all the others. The last thing I'll point out is this cross-disciplinary collaborations, which really kind of isn't much of a thing right now. I haven't seen a whole lot, but AI today is very isolated in a sense. It's you and ChatGPT or something like that. I haven't seen a whole lot where it's multiple people working together on a thing, other than like a Zoom call where it's incorporating what everybody's saying into something. But like, imagine a collaboration between artists, or an artist and a writer and a musician working together in the same kind of collaborative space. Collaborations are really important for artists, right? If there is some kind of space where you could work together to come up with new, interesting things, whether or not that AI generates the final piece of all of your work together, or it helps you understand how to build something outside of that. I'd love to be able to see more of that, and I expect that to come at some time soon. So I don't know. With that, I'm a couple minutes over here. Apologize, but I want to make sure that what I'm getting across here is not so much a soapbox to say, hey, you should be using this, right? Or this is the right way to go. I know that there are lots of questions, but I really think it's important to understand like the gamut of things that AI can do for you as an artist, as a creative, as somebody who is really just trying to navigate a world that is changing because of this technology. It's important for us at the very least to be able to explore some of these different ideas. If you do nothing, Google around, spend a lot of time on YouTube and look at what people are doing. Even better if you're tinkering yourself. I think that that's really, really valuable. I know stuff is confusing and concerning, and but I think that there are some opportunities, and I would love to understand more of what you're doing and what you're thinking, so I can think about it myself and maybe sort of incorporate what you're thinking into what I'm doing, and the reverse as well. So anyway, I appreciate your time. That's all I got.
All right. Thank you, Jeff.
Should I stop sharing, I assume?
Yeah, then we can be big on the screen instead of tiny little thumbnails off on the side.
Got it.
If you have any questions, you want to talk about anything, we encourage you to post them in the chat or the Q&A. We did have a couple of more logistical questions come in. Do you have any advice? Mabel's asking, do you have any advice about learning to make the proper prompts? I know that's a difficult process, learning how to use the tool. And you did admit that at first you couldn't get the outputs that you wanted, correct?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. One thing I would not do is pay somebody for a cheat sheet. Save your money, right? There is so much information online, YouTube, articles, podcasts. I listen to podcasts a lot. Technically, I'm on a sabbatical right now, so I got a lot of spare time. But if you have an opportunity, there's some really great ones that are out there. But just specifically on prompts, like that stuff it's actually changing very rapidly. Just get on YouTube and start poking around and start playing. This is a great example of where playing around helps, because there are websites, right? You can go and they'll show a bunch of pictures and they'll prompts that go along with it. Or sometimes people tweet their pictures, and the alt is got the prompts in there as well. So they're showing, this is my prompt. And you're like, oh, that looks awesome. I want to use that. And you use it. And then you change one word and it's like, what the hell is that? Right? It just totally like breaks. So you need to be able to try things and tinker and see what works for you, especially if you have something specific in mind that is focused on your own style or something. So try them out.
Absolutely. I keep seeing these like $500, $600 courses on how to prompt Midjourney and stuff. I was wondering how they could possibly offer a course.
Well, so actually on that is really interesting, because you could spend all this money or all this time even learning how to prompt in Midjourney. And then something like ChatGPT comes out with, they just released DALL-E 3 that's incorporated into ChatGPT. If you have a pro account, you have access to that. But you could use a version of that on Bing for free. It's actually the same DALL-E 3, but it's incorporated into Bing Chat or Bing, whatever they call that. That is a completely different way of prompting. In fact, it's natural language. One of the benefits of it is like, it's literally just like, I want, a cafe scene with a person with a trench coat and somebody in the corner, blah, blah, blah. You just write it in like natural language. That would not work in Midjourney at all. But seems to work magically in DALL-E 3. So like you really have to experiment and look around and see how it's changing from one day to the next.
Absolutely. And every tool is different. I'm glad you brought that up. Like every system, it works differently. Someone did mention they used ChatGPT to help them create better prompts. I've heard people doing that as well.
Yeah.
Interesting. Speaking of ChatGPT, going back to, there was a question about your little back and forth dialogue between the three people that you had created. They just wanted to clarify, like, was that created by you exclusively or in collaboration with other real people? You said you used ChatGPT to create that code.
I used ChatGPT to write that code. Now, I'm comfortable writing code myself, and a lot of engineers, I'm not a production engineer at this point. It's been several years, but since I was like officially a developer, but I still like tinker around myself, so I can write bad code, right? But I used ChatGPT to write this application. Basically, I had an idea and said, I want an application that does XYZ in this platform for React. It's written in React. And I was like, give me React code for this. And there was a lot of back and forth. Okay, now add this, now do this. And then sometimes I would change the code myself manually because, it was just easier to just make some changes myself. But it was just me and ChatGPT working together on developing this. And when I referred to other people, I was kind of referring to other people in the chat, right? Each of those people are have their own personas, and I can actually flip the context from one to the other. So I have the one that I was showing there was me having a theoretical imaginary interview with people who work at Super Rare, which is an NFT marketplace. And I gave them all backstories and their roles on the team and all that kind of stuff. And it was us talking about my art. kind of, and somebody was a marketer, or somebody was a much older curator, and another one was on the technology team, right? So the questions came in different ways from different people. But I could flip that conversation. I have a drop down for choosing a different one where it's having an interview with for an AI job, or for something else, right? Like each of those has like a context and a series of actors, if you will, right? And so you've staged that, and I could just associate that with each conversation. So it was really just sort of like a way for me to kind of learn more of what I can do from a technology perspective with these AIs. And that particular example was me using it for talking about art in that case.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, they say pretty soon we'll have in our pockets, we'll be able to just ask our own pocket lawyer, our own pocket doctors, questions.
Well, those are two industries that may lag a little bit.
Yeah.
but yeah.
We did have a question submitted about reception of your art. The particular question was, what challenges have you faced in terms of ownership or legitimacy as a digital artist and AI artist? Have you faced any pushback trying to get work out there?
You betcha. Yeah, I mean, I remember one gallery that was outside of Austin here that was putting on a surrealist show, and there's a lot of connections between AI art and surrealism. I won't get into it, but I felt like my work at the time was like really fit well with that. And I thought, oh, this is great. I'm going to do right. And I put my stuff in, and I got this letter back saying, no, sorry, you weren't accepted. But normally, like when that happens, it's a form letter, right? But this was like an actual email that was sent back. And she said, no, I really love your stuff and blah, blah, blah. But, sorry. And I thought, well, since she gave, a personal, email to me, I responded back and I was like, oh, great. And, I'm trying to get, more into this and into the local scene. And, do you have any advice? And her response was, well, I think, I love what you're doing, said more complimentary things, but, maybe you should like focus on, making sure that your art is going into like the shows that are, specific to your work. So maybe, AI shows. And I didn't want to make much of it, but I sent thanks, whatever. But I was thinking to myself, like, what the hell? It's like it would be like if somebody responded back like with a watercolor, and they're like, no, you don't belong in this show because you should focus on watercolor shows. And it's like, and my art isn't supposed to be about AI. In this case, the pieces that I submitted were surrealist pieces, right? They just happened to use it as a tool. And I wasn't about to have that argument with her or that debate. Maybe I wouldn't have argued, obviously, but it's, there are plenty of people who just don't accept it. It's not real. It's not, it's not a thing. And I accept actually to some degree, if somebody's just cranking out like easy images and they're submitting to shows, that's one thing. But I like to think that I put a lot of work in outside of the AI side, right? And it does make me wonder about how I present my work in terms of like how much AI is in there. Do I try to tone it down, or I don't know. It's interesting. So there are some people who love it and are really excited by it. And then there are some people who are just, nobody gets mad at me, but there are people who are just sort of like, right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and your response is kind of touching back on this. What is the level of human involvement, again, that's going to justify either seeing it as a piece of art or, in terms of copyright, like legally, like that it's a copyrightable piece of work as well. I'm wondering how do you let people know that you're using AI? Are you very transparent up front, or is it part of the description in your work? Like are you letting people guess? Like,
I'm still navigating that, right? But yes, and I do. But my story is really about the blend of technologies, and I talk about AI as being part of that, and it's deliberate because, for one thing, I'm trying to say that there's more to it than the AI. I'm trying to say that I have my human fingerprint on it. I'm also trying to be upfront and honest, about the fact that AI is part of this. So if somebody's really against it and they really want to make sure they can say that, no, there's no AI in my show, right? That I don't want to dupe them in any way. And I think it's important for anybody who's using AI to be transparent about it and how they're using it. But you know, there's a wide variety of opinions. So I haven't found the magic bullet, but I do feel a little bit safer because my process is a little more complex than somebody who's just using Midjourney and outputting something and trying to pass it off as art. That's just me. Everybody's got their own take.
Do you ever tell people, like, do you go as far as letting people know the prompt you use?
I haven't, but I don't know that I have a problem with that. It has recently come to my attention about how I might change the way I prompt for just the optics, as they say, right? I have admittedly in the past said something like in the style of Toulouse-Lautrec, right? I don't use Toulouse-Lautrec because he's too obvious, right? But there are artists that are just simply representative of like a time period or a style, right? And I'm not trying to steal their stuff in any sense, but like I'm just it's like shorthand for getting to the style, right? And I think I probably want to phase that out. Well, I have phased that out, honestly, right? But I want to make sure that I don't say something or show something that makes people really question, the validity of things, and because they are valid concerns, right? I don't want to set myself up. So,
Absolutely. There seems to be a lot of, there's a question that was submitted, will AI eventually reduce the value of traditional painting? And not just this question, but, you know, some of the social media posts, some of the questions that were submitted during registration, there seems to be this fear of AI art eventually devaluing quote unquote real art or traditional art. And I know you kind of spoke to that in the beginning of your talk, but do you have any insights or statements toward that?
yeah, that's a really good question. I don't think that anybody knows really. I mean, well, one thing I will say is that I don't know that it would change the value of a physical work of art, like a painting or something. If today it's worth $1,000, tomorrow it's worth $1,000, right? That I don't think it really changes it. Now, it may change the fact that maybe your job is not so much in the fine arts, but just sort of like you're an illustrator or a designer or something. It may change the nature of people who are hired to do art for sure. I feel like that your rates won't go down, but it may be harder to get work, honestly. There might be that, and what the impact of AI is on jobs is really is scary for some people, for a lot of people. I think that there's a case to be made for, if you can do the job 10 times faster with AI, if you have a team of, or you hire, 10 contractors, or you have a team of 10 and you can do a job 10 times faster with AI, do you reduce down to one person or do you do 10 times more work? Hopefully, people choose 10 times more work. One has to be true to their business as much as their people. So if it financially doesn't make sense to do that, then I hate to say that that's going to influence people. Any technology change, like this is going to be, it's intended to be disruptive. And it's going to change the nature of work. Sometimes that's going to change who has the ability to get the jobs or what your job is. But in terms of like the value, I still think that like it doesn't really change the value of today's like physical works if you're a fine artist, but I think that it's totally up in the air of like how to value AI art, and how, like, what the ripple effect is on. I guess I'm kind of rambling here. The long and the short of it is I don't know.
Yeah. And I don't think anybody knows. I think the fear comes from these technologies opening the door to quote unquote anybody being able to do it. And that's the fear, is like, if you can just type in a prompt to get what you want, then why do we need artists? But
Well, those people are artists then,
Yeah.
right? If we consider that work to be art, then they're artists. If they don't know how to paint, but they can prompt, well, there you go. They're still an artist. They're just not a painter, right? I guess that's my take. But the creativity comes from within. It's there are creative people who have no talent in any particular skill, but they're still creative. If there's a way to channel that creativity and artistry into something using a new kind of tool, well, good for them.
Yeah, if anything, I feel like these tools are going to start to separate the mediocre from the really exceptional. Like there's going to be like this sharp divide, and it's going to become, if anything, more obvious, like what is exceptional and artistic and creative versus what is just mediocre, like let me just get the job done.
That is 100% true. I think a lot of people immediately start thinking about cyberpunk squirrels on the moon or something, right? When they're thinking of AI art. And, at one point that was like, oh, that's cool. But like it probably took 2 minutes to be like, yeah, okay, I've seen that 100 times. Right. But now but there are like strictly AI artists. I'm constantly blown away with like, how did you do that? Right. And, and and the work is just beautiful. So there are stars and then there are the average Joes. Just because somebody knows how to use a pencil doesn't mean the pictures that they make is art, right? There is something that somebody does with that pencil to turn something into art. And the analogy is a real loose one, but I think the same is true with more advanced technologies like AI.
Yeah, you actually showed that picture that had the award earlier in your presentation with the opening.
Yep. Yeah.
I don't know if a lot of people know, but that person, it was over 600 prompts, I believe, to end up getting to that final image. Like just keep checking and trial and error. So there is a little bit of work, I think, that goes into using these tools. That you just don't just type and get what you want. So maybe if more people played around with them, they would realize that it's not as easy as it seems, right?
And then there's work that goes on afterwards. And it's the reason why when I was talking about photographers early on, I was saying, and then there's all this work that happens after the shot, right? The same is true with AI art. When you're looking at those people who are just strictly AI artists, they're not just working in Midjourney or Stable Diffusion or something. They're outputting something, but then they're bringing it into Photoshop and they're doing something else to it or other tools, right? And it's AI is part of that process, and they may not be as like munging things up as I am doing. I am like taking things like way far from what the AI generated, but they are using these other tools to really make it like something real in the same way that a photographer uses filters and and things to be able to like really bring certain elements of their photograph out, right? So it's not just all the work that goes into the AI, but it's also what happens outside of that needs to be considered.
Absolutely. I'm just curious about our attendees. I'm wondering, I think you have a little raise your hand thing. If you've used AI before, I just want to see like hands to generate art, just trying to get a sense of, are people actually using these tools? So raise your hand if you're like playing around with it. I'd like to know how many people are kind of doing that. Seeing a couple hands go up, but not too many. Thumbs up, I see. Yeah, so I mean that's a relatively low percentage of our audience here. It's interesting. And I do see the question about if I create a graphic character in AI, can I get copyright? That's more of a question for a lawyer, but in general, my first just based on the recent webinar we had with a copyright and AI lawyer, no, you would not get a copyright on something created in AI. That's a graphic character. If you wrote a novel around that graphic character, you could copyright the graphic novel portion that you created as a human, but the images are not copyrightable. And again, I think that's more of a question for a legal advisor at this point. back to that human, someone did put a comment in there that human involvement, this is also related, tangentially related to copyright, is human involvement is kind of the main indicator right now of whether or not you get a copyright. I know, Jeff, you mentioned that AI work is not copyrightable, but the wording that was put forth is they cannot grant copyright to works absent of any human involvement. And in this previous webinar we did with the lawyer, he pointed out that that's a very peculiar wording, because basically what that's leaving open is at some point is if you can prove enough human involvement, then maybe it will be copyrightable. So they're leaving the door open. It's not completely shut.
Right.
It's just like this state of flux right now. This fly.
Yeah, that's what I had referenced earlier, that this ruling came out, but it's not really the end of the story, right? Because the way that they had put it out was basically saying we can't give you the protection until we hear all these things. And the interesting thing was about this court case was that, like, all the things that were mentioned, maybe not all of them, but several of the things that were mentioned were things that they could have put out, but they didn't for whatever reason, right? And there is no such thing right now. Well, I shouldn't say there's really no such thing, if you wanted to make the argument right now, for AI to not have human involvement. Like, that doesn't exist. Even somebody who creates something that there are these art bots that go and generate art automatically using AI, but the person who started it, who made the bot to begin with, that they were involved. So you could make an argument. And it sounds like it's semantics, but law is semantics, right? When it comes down to it, right? So this is why it's a little squishy at the moment. And while they did put this out there, it really is laying the foundation, being very upfront. Somebody started something, hey, can I copyright this? And the government said, no, you can't, because I don't have these things. And like, the natural response is, okay, now I'll bring them to you, right? So we're waiting for that next person to come along. That doesn't mean that AI will be copyrightable per se, but it means that in time, that the powers that be will have the information to make the appropriate decision. You can do this and you can't do that. Like, these are the constraints. So it's just the beginning of that conversation, not legal advice.
Right. We are not offering legal advice, but yeah, it's an exciting time to be living through this. I know you made the analogy, it's like the start of the internet again, and it kind of is. And when the internet first came out, people had no idea what would become of it. And now look at it. Like, there's so much, so many resources. It's been taken in so many different directions. It's kind of like that with AI. And I'm bringing this topic up because I know you're a technologist. And do you have any insights into, like, maybe the direction you see this going as from a technological perspective, I guess, that might be relevant or not relevant for artists to know?
I think the next big wave is likely in how AI is integrated into other things. It's one thing to say you have a chat bot or you have something that can generate images, but how do you weave it into things? And a lot of this will be driven by business when it comes down to it. Right now, you can tune models on data sets or your files or your, a variety of things. But like, what happens when you can like weave that with Salesforce and your HR system and Jira for your engineers and all these other things? Like, you can come up with something that's much more interesting. Right now, you can wire these things together, but it's a heavy engineering lift to do that. I think that we will see, in the same way the internet evolved from these independent little abilities to the SaaS models that incorporate all kinds of things, integrations across different kinds of functions. We'll see the same thing happen with AI, and that will have much more of an impact than what we saw with the internet, because so much more can be automated in that way. Because it's not just automation, it's automation plus something thinking about how things are automated, right? You could automate things in the past by just manually wiring things together. And then you put in your business rules for how things, flow in a sense, but now imagine that automation can think for itself, and under certain circumstances, it's going to go down one path and then it may make a decision to, nope, we're going to do something in a different way. That will be really exciting and scary, right? That's why we need to better understand this space, because the technology is rapidly getting to a point where we can do that. And we're already seeing stuff. The big players, Google and Amazon in particular, are like trying to compete with OpenAI by saying, okay, well, we're integrating everything across, your computer. So Microsoft, in terms of like including Copilot and like everything within Windows, from your, from everything, right, to Google doing the same thing, weaving together your docs and your spreadsheets and your emails and your chats and all this kind of stuff. Like they're trying to like make that integration play, and that somebody like OpenAI, who's now like the front runner in everything, is can't really compete with unless they make things open. But yeah, so you asked a technical question and I went into the weeds there. Apologize, but it's there's some interesting stuff to come.
Absolutely. And
well, and actually, let me just tie this in real quick. From the artist perspective, that means there's so many more opportunities for squeezing your art into something. I don't know how. Like I gave a real stupid example of like getting stuff into staged apartments on Zillow or realtor.com or something. That's a real example that could be done today, actually. But how else? What other opportunities in other industries and other businesses are there for giving more chances for artists to make their stuff public?
Right.
It's endless.
Yeah, I mean, just some examples that come to my mind is like creating art in the style of, and maybe we start doing in the style of smaller name artists, not these big ginormous names, but
Yeah.
there are some artists that have pushed back against AI that I had never even heard of before AI. So AI art generated on their style actually made me know who they were. And I think there's some work in that, in like the voice automation realm as well, people licensing their voices out, and musicians pushing to license, people wanting to license their face, actors and actresses licensing. So like there might be other ways to make money other than like it's based on your style or something about you particularly.
Right. For sure.
Hopefully it's paid better than like Spotify and those sorts of things to musicians, but we never know where it's going. I do see another question about copyright. Yeah, I mean, copyright issues it's the huge thing. Ownership and attribution, that's the huge debate with AI, and that's where a lot of the controversy lies. But it's so early, as Jeff pointed out, in the game right now. The regulation is not there from the side of the artists who are fighting against it. The regulations haven't been put in place, and the copyright laws haven't caught up for people producing works with AI. They're all in flux. So we really don't have an answer. I know you want to hear more about copyright issues, but we will certainly invite more lawyers. We're talking to a legal advisor to Washington who might come and speak to the group about what's going on there in terms of regulation. But right now we're in the moment of flux, and we just have to kind of take a deep breath and realize that we're in this moment of transition. We're in this state of limbo while things get worked out. We are coming up at the end of the hour. I do want to give Jeff an opportunity to say anything else if he needs to, but before he does, I want to make sure people know that next Tuesday we have another webinar coming up about surviving AI as an artist. And this speaker is going to give some interesting perspectives about what AI art is, these technologies, the pressures they're putting on you as an artist, and maybe some steps you can take to pivot a little bit or adjust or adapt. And it should be an interesting talk. It'll be an interactive discussion where we can mingle and interact face to face. So that's next Tuesday. I've put the link in the chat if you want to join. The other thing I want to remind you, so the recording will be posted on YouTube, but when you leave tonight's webinar, there will be a pop-up survey. If you want to leave some comments, some feedback about what you thought about tonight, if you have feedback about maybe future topics that we should address, please, we do read those. Those are not read by AI. Those are read by humans, I promise. We do read those comments to plan our webinars and plan our speakers accordingly. So encourage you to just take a minute. Your feedback is anonymous. You can be as nice or mean as you like. You won't hurt our feelings. We want to hear from you. So I do encourage you to fill out that survey when you leave tonight. But thank you very much, Jeff, for this enlightening discussion on some really difficult subject matter around AI. And I know you've mentioned you've faced pushback, you've faced resistance, and you're still going strong and representing Austin well as well. So thank you for being here and sharing. Do you have any final inspirational words of advice or any statement for our attendees before we leave?
Thank you very much. Thanks, Miranda, for having me. Thanks everybody for joining. I really do appreciate that. Advice, I would say get your hands dirty a little bit, try something. Like I say, do it in private if you need to, then that's totally fine. I think that you learn by doing, and whatever you come up with, that's good for you. That's fine with me. I appreciate you showing up. That's at least shows that you have a little bit of interest. If anybody wants to talk about any of this stuff further, there's a QR code in the downloadable, or if you look at the video afterwards or whatever, like you can figure out how to reach me through that somehow. I'm more than happy to continue conversations with anyone one-on-one, for sure. I want to learn more about what people are doing. I want to meet more in this space. And even if you really don't like this stuff, then you have counter opinions. I want to hear that too. I really do, honestly. So anyways, thanks a lot, Miranda. Thanks everybody for joining.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jeff, for sharing. Appreciate you being brave and talking on this topic. And with that, I guess we'll wish everyone a good evening, good night, and we'll see you around and hope to have you back to join the conversation in the future. Bye-bye.